Today on the Roundhouse, we are talking to an ace railroad photographer. All aboard!
In days past, the roundhouse was where the railroad worker united with the steam locomotive, each to prepare for the journey ahead. Today, it's where we examine the history, the industry, the machines, the hobby, and the passion behind railroading. News, interviews, stories, and more. So climb aboard. This is The Roundhouse.
Welcome to the Roundhouse. I'm your host, Nick Ozarek, and this is episode number 98 of our Trains and Railroading podcast, where we're talking about everything in the industry and the hobby. You name it, and we discuss it today. We're talking to Dennis Livesey. He is a railroad photographer, works in the film industry, published a book, Smoke Over Steamtown, with some of his amazing photos. There's links in the show notes so you can see his work. We talked to him about his approach, film versus digital, things along those lines. Before we get to that, though, today's sponsor for the Roundhouse is, appropriately, Age of Steam Roundhouse, who recently fired up their number 19 steam locomotive, and they are having a virtual event on September 11th of 2020. Check them out at ageofsteamroundhouse.org. Our guest today is a motion picture camera assistant operator, a rail photographer, and a heritage railroad conductor. He's taken photos of trains from around the country. He has a book called Smoke Over Steamtown. Please welcome to the Roundhouse, Mr. Dennis A. Livesey.
Well, thank you, folks. Thank you, Nick. This is a great honor and privilege to be on the Roundhouse. I've been listening to your podcast for years now, and always enjoyed the incredible variety and the terrific questions you give. And I've always learned a lot. It's always been, something to look forward to. And I just feel, very honored to be here. Thanks.
Oh, well, that's very nice. And I have to return that compliment by saying that I've been a fan of yours for many years now, and can say that it's been at least as long, if not longer, that I've been seeing your name crop up, especially on railpictures.net, with these amazing photos. So likewise, I'm glad to have you on the show.
Well, excellent. This is off to a good start, I can tell already.
I'll take it. What got you going in visual media, and what elements came first for you?
Well, to be honest, it all starts with my father, Herbert. He was the camera person in my family. And after a period of time, I was able to look in these massive photo albums that he made. He was the kind of fellow, very organized. He'd get the photos back from the processor that day, and then he'd put them in the album that night, and he'd label them up, and so forth. And so I have all 33 of these albums, and it's a remarkable history of one man. It's a scrapbook and his photographs, so it has all of his life, my early life, and so forth. So anyway, looking at those and then making the correlation between the funny-looking thing that he put in front of his face that was black and silvery and had circles and rectangles, and that was the camera that took the pictures. Looking at these albums, this was the crux for me, because I'd look at the pictures, I'd look for pictures of me when I was a kid, but then I'd see pictures of my parents, my brother, my sister, and all my friends, so forth, and it became my time machine. Photography became my entry into being able to relate to the world, to be able to see things in a context that just wasn't presenting itself any other way. So this was also the era of the big Life magazines and National Geographic and the new medium called television. We're talking about the 1950s. And so these things were hitting me. My mother, Jane, and my brother, Bailey, They loved the movies. They took me to the movies. So I'd see the movies, I'd see Dad's photos, I'd see these magazines. I was just bombarded by it. And then when it came clear that I was interested in, trains, my father, who was in the printing business, he knew about Lucius Beebe. And so he started giving me Lucius Beebe books. And I blame him, and that's it. It went from there.
Were you starting with photography, and then that's eventually what led into cinematography and filmmaking?
Yeah, good correlation. Absolutely. It was this love of the camera. I love the mechanics of it. I love what the magic it can do. I love these pictures that I saw in the books, BB books, Trains magazine, Model Railroader magazine, Life magazine, National Geographic, and the movies. Seeing, Ben-Hur, and Lawrence of Arabia, and watching television and seeing Lassie or Casey Jones and stuff. These were all elements that I really gyrated to. In high school, I got involved with rock and roll bands, played guitar in a couple of bands, and that was cool. Then also I got involved with school plays. So it was like this whole nexus of music and theater, photography. It was, by the time high school was ending and college was starting, it was, well, Dennis, what do you want to do with your life? Okay, well, I think maybe I'll go into the film business. And I wound up going to NYU Film School, graduating from there. And that was how that started. I wound up going to Los Angeles with a couple of friends of mine who were attending school out there. And that's, the funny thing in life is that nothing happens, like tomorrow I'm going to be president of the United States, or tomorrow I'm going to play in the World Series. It doesn't happen that way. It's a number of steps. One thing leads to another, to another, to another. And in Los Angeles, I started knocking on doors. I found one guy who hired me. Then he led me to another job where I worked in a laboratory, which then led to my union membership, which then my old friends from school introduced me to some Hollywood cinematographers, and boom, I started working at Universal, 20th Century Fox, MGM. At MGM, I got to work with the famed cinematographer Sven Nykvist on a picture called Cannery Row, starring Nick Nolte and Deborah Winger. It was on that picture with Sven, who was an Oscar-winning cinematographer who worked with Ingmar Bergman, who became Sven was highly respected, wound up working with Woody Allen and all sorts of people. It was gorgeous. It's very soft. We called it soft lighting. Very natural, much more natural than the old Hollywood with its hard lighting you used to do. But it was there. We did a shot with Deborah and Nick on the stage, the old stage at MGM where they did all the water movies. And it was she was setting up house in an abandoned boiler, oddly enough, without the flues and so forth. And she's making this place, and we photograph her in the boiler. She's doing house, and we boom up, and we see Nick coming through the front flue sheet, oddly enough. So we go to the dailies the next day, and for some reason they allowed me, a Mr. Nobody, to come. And I'm looking at the dailies, and oh my gosh, there's this horrible mistake. Sven underexposed Deborah by 3 stops. She's black. You can't see her. She's so heavily in the shadows. It's a horrible mistake. So I was wondering, what the heck is he going to say? And he said, well, I guess we have to shoot that over. Now, to any other mere mortal camera person, you're fired. but it was Sven Nykvist, and yes, sir, we'll just shoot it again. But it was so important to me at that moment to realize that if the greatest cinematographer I'd ever worked with made a huge faux pas like that, it was normal for anybody else to make a mistake. And this was an incredible confidence building for me. And anyway, I did more of Hollywood stuff. I wound up working on the Muppet movie. Yes, I worked with Frank Oz and Jim Henson and Kermit the Frog and Fozzie the Bear and Miss Piggy. I also did the fight sequences for Rocky 2 and 3. Yes, I worked with Sylvester Stallone and Carl Weathers and Mr. T. Those were incredible moments. As it happened, I wound up coming back to New York. It's just a sequence of events. I felt more comfortable here at home. And I had to sort of start at the bottom, and it wasn't until for another 10 years or so before I started getting back into movies. And then there were moments of movies like Bad Lieutenant with Harvey Keitel, a very intense, super raw drama. It's don't see it if you're squeamish. The next picture would have been that was memorable was with Bad Lieutenant and Big Night were pictures shot by a man who hired me on several pictures, Ken Kelsch, ASC. And with Ken, I saw what you could do with light. And this is the crux of it all. From when I saw Sven Nykvist do his thing, also Vilmo Zsigmond, the Howard Schwartz doing the old 3-point lighting at Universal for the Incredible Hulk. I got to see these men, these artists, do these things with these lighting units. One of the basic things about lighting in movies is that it's not real. It's the illusion of reality. Film stocks were just horribly slow, and you'd walk onto a film set in the 70s, ASA 100. You needed sunglasses, but you were doing a night scene. It was really kind of nutty and an incredible skill that these cinematographers had to make it, just the right exposure and right light levels. They could make it look like anything. And with Ken, seeing it was there, he really formulated my views on chiaroscuro lighting, the Italian lighting of, what was it, Degas, and those guys, where there's this incredible bright to dark. The thing with light is this contrast, and contrast is the key to photography for me. It is, when my college roommate said, "Yeah, it's got good contrast," I wouldn't know what good contrast was if FedEx had delivered it to me. I just had no idea. But now I understand. It is this nexus of light versus dark. And when you have good contrast, it makes, I like to say, it makes my eyes dance with excitement. And it's like a main line into my eyeballs, into my heart, into my whole being. You react viscerally, emotionally. That's the power of good light. Because one final thing with contrast is that it's not what's happening in the light that's that interesting. It's what's happening in the dark. And that's one of the things that powers me in my shooting. I look for great lighting, and that's pretty much my whatever my skill set is. That's where I'm going. I'm sorry, I just want to kind of ramble and free flowed there, but I think you got a lot of the idea.
Building off of the idea of contrast and light, one of the things that impressed me and made your name stand out for me when I would regularly comb railpictures.net is that you could make transit photos exciting. especially your love of the New York City subway system and the elevated lines on it, and your ability to find ways of making it this really living thing in your photos. Like right now, I'm looking at this shot from April of 2018. It's a head-on shot where the subway appears to be heading straight for you. The lights are really bright. There's a zoom blur. The car itself is tack sharp. I love the action and excitement it gives to a scene like that.
Exactly. That's I finally, my friend Mitch Goldman was instrumental in helping me figure out how to finally do that follow zoom kind of effect, because before I just couldn't do it. I have been asked before, and let me tell you how this all happened. Well, as you may know, I work for a major electronics store, and every once in a while I get to test, a camera. And it just so happened that in March of 2011, I got my grubby little mitts on a Nikon D700 and a 2470 Nikkor, and I've walked out at like 6 o'clock in the evening, and I got this great camera, and I say, "Oh man, I got to take a picture, but of what? Oh, there's nothing around. Everything's underground here in New York City. There's nothing. Wait a minute. I could go to Smith and Ninth, and the clouds look really kind of crazy. I don't know if it'll work." So anyway, I go there. I go to Smith and Ninth. The G train comes, and there's the whole panorama of Lower Manhattan and these fabulous clouds. I took the photo. I took it home, and I was still learning how to do processing. I've only been doing it for like about 3 years, and I still was kind of timid with it. But this time I got a little more bolder with the sliders, and I said, "Wow, that doesn't look too bad." And I threw it up on Rail Pictures, and people liked it. And I started thinking, "Say, maybe there's something to this," because you got to kind of understand. I've been a rail fan for all my life. I've lived in New York City since the 1970s. And, when I would shoot the big fancy trains, and then you do, next down on the social scale is, well, you do your local trains and your local freight, your local passenger train. And, but then you were really desperate if you wanted to shoot, MU cars. They all look the same. They're all boring. And then the lowest of the low would be subways. So I didn't want any part of that. I mean, there wasn't any glamour in subways. But with that thing happening in 2013, it started to show the possibilities of what transit can do. And so then I began exploring it more and more. One of the reasons I got into the movies is I love drama. I love emotion. I love color. I love that light. And so I started exploring, after work. I grabbed my cameras and just going to go on an elevated somewhere, and the sun would be setting. So it's like that fabulous time of night, that famous time of day where the light is interesting and it has intense color, and you got the contrast. And so you just started framing stuff. Hey, this looks good. Hey, that's nice also. And that's how it started. And so then it feeds upon itself. You start doing it more and more, looking for new places, new ideas. I've seen in the last couple of years lots of guys going out there and doing great things, like Michael Pearson in Philadelphia. He's phenomenal. He's all over the place doing transit. He's currently in Boston, exploring, and you're seeing Boston like you've never seen it before. Or here in New York, you got Tim Grice and Mark Klexman. They're all exploring, the local stuff. And there is stuff. All you got to do is look for it. You got to be Dorothy. You got to appreciate what's happening in your own backyard, and shoot it now before it's gone. Like the R32s, the oldest air-conditioned cars in the New York City subway. They were gone a few months ago, but since Bombardier's cars are causing issues, the R32s are back, and we have railfan windows again. So you take advantage of what you've got. But that's pretty much the genesis of doing the transit stuff. I did my one book, and I'm planning to do Transitscapes. I've got plenty of material for that, and it should be basically transit like you've never seen it before, and that's basically the idea behind that. I've been I'll let you know a little secret, but I've been holding back on a lot of the images I've taken over the past couple of years because I want to share them only in the book, and so there'll be a reason for somebody to buy the book. So there you go.
When you talk about learning from film, your experience being on sets, watching these great cinematographers applying their craft, and how you apply that thinking to your work. For me, I would say if I had to name a favorite cinematographer, I'd go with Roger Deakins. I love the work that he did in Skyfall and Blade Runner 2049. If you're listening, you may have seen his stuff from The Shawshank Redemption or Fargo, or most recently, as of recording this in the summer of 2020, the war movie 1917. If people are watching movies, there's two parts to this question. The first part being, if they're watching a movie, what should they pay attention to as far as that was the cinematographer, as opposed to that was the director? And how can they take that and apply it to their craft, whether it be photography or film?
Wow, that's a really good question, Nick. I'm glad you asked that because it's one of those eternal mysteries. As a film student, I figured it was the director of photography who figured out the compositions and the cutting and all that sort of stuff. No. In making a film, a good film, a good director has the visual ideas in place, and he hires and works with people who can create those visions, that idea, that visual look. There are three really essential people in the look in the film. It is the director, telling the director of photography. They collaborate on the shot content, and then the material goes to the editor, and the editor starts working with and seeing how they can cut it together. If necessary, all three of them get together and speak about their ideas. Hopefully in pre-production, the editor, the director of photography, and the director, they're all talking about what they want to do and how they want to edit it, and how they want it shot, and how they want to present it. They watch films that they think are good examples of what they're trying for. So what you're seeing on screen, and the shot content, you're actually looking at a collaboration. Some people like Ridley Scott, he may have a director of photography listed, but he's shooting the movie. He may be the director, but there may be some guy with the director of photography credit, but it's essentially his way. Whereas in other things, like with Deakins, working with the Coen brothers, they work together on shot. How about this? No, I think you should do this. Oh, that's a good idea. We'll do it that way. It's very collaborative. Deakins operates his own movies, but then on other instances, there is an operator, and that person lends their ideas, and that person is there to capture the moment, to see what's happening through the camera, and to be able to be sensitive enough to understand the correct composition at that time. And he will, or she will, offer ideas to the director of photography. so it's shot content is very collaborative, but you will generally have to cede that to the director if it's a very good, well-known, because he's very powerful. You know, it's basically a Steven Spielberg film, while Janusz Kaminski is applying this incredible lighting, and certainly working with Steven regarding the shot content. From my understanding, with Spielberg, he's pretty much setting up the shot content the way he wants it. And let's see, Mitch Dubin, he did many of their pictures, and it would be upon him to execute that particular shot. Then when it comes to editing, editing is where the movie is made. And it's so incredibly important to understand while you're shooting how all the bits and pieces come together, and how there's things like screen direction. You have to have the eyes moving in the right direction. Otherwise, people get confused as to where anybody is looking or where everybody is traveling. There are certain conventions that you most of the time follow. Of course, now movie making today, in some ways, I know people my age, older, retired folks say, it's not as good as it used to be. There's no respect for the cameraman. And well, it has changed tremendously in that, it used to be that the cameraman is the only one who knew what it looked like. And nobody knew about what it looked like until the next day if the film got processed and dried and they projected. And so they had a lot of power on set. No, we can't do that. Oh, okay. And you had to, now though, everybody can see in 4K, 8K, on 48-inch TV exactly what the image looks like. And so all of a sudden, everybody's an expert. So there is that issue, which has changed. And my old job of focus pulling. And back in my day, I was with film cameras. And I had to, my job after I got the camera all set up and the director says action, I'm supposed to focus on the actor as they move around the set. Sometimes the camera's not moving, sometimes the camera's moving, and the actor's moving, and we're on dollies, we're on cranes, we're on Steadicams, or we're handheld. And my job was to keep them in focus. Now, the weird thing was, back in that time, I didn't have a TV monitor that I could use. And I couldn't look through the camera operator was looking through the camera. So I had to use my eyeballs. I had to judge, when they went from 5'6" to 8'2" and up to 3'4", and do that. I would, gauge and I would calibrate my eye by using a tape measure, other measuring devices. But once the action started, used to be years ago, used to have marks. Don't have those anymore. Director thinks that's too confining, so they just shoot. And, no marks, no rehearsal. Want that fresh. John Ford was like that. Abel Ferrara on his movies that I did, particularly Bad Lieutenant. Everything's, the first take is sacrosanct, that freshness, that spontaneity. So I had to pull focus without marks with just my eyeball. And most of the time I got it. Unfortunately, sometimes I didn't, but hey, that was part of the game. Nowadays, it's all digital. And like I said, you got the big screens. Everybody sees exactly what it looks like. And focus pulling now has turned into, the focus puller has a 7-inch TV with some focusing aids called peaking on it, where they're a rainbow of colors, with red generally the one that's most important. That's usually right around the person's eyes. And they've got a remote control, a big knob, and they're pulling focus on the lens that may be 20 feet away from them, inside or somewhere else, and they're just looking at the TV, and they're following that focus peaking and keeping the actor in focus that way, which is, Let me tell you, I wish I had had that device sometimes back in the day, because there were some shots that were impossible to. I couldn't judge where something was 13 feet 3 inches away. What are you, nuts? I'm not that good. I could figure out it was like 6 feet, but not 13 and a half feet. Oh God, that was misery. Because you'd have like 3 or 4 inches depth of field with a Zeiss 135 at a T 2.1, and there was no depth of field, and I call that lens the Widowmaker. It was a nasty thing. But today you can have this stuff, so you generally see it, and you see it then. Some of the guys who older complain about it's not as good as it used to. Honestly, I think today's filmmaking and the fact that this device I'm holding in my hand, this phone, I could make a movie. I could not only shoot it, I could not only edit it, I can then distribute it, all with this phone. And I think the ability to be able to make movies, anybody can make a movie. Having this ability opens up possibilities. Yes, you're going to get a lot of junk, of course, but 30 years ago, 40 years ago, to make a film with sound was appallingly expensive. It cost thousands of dollars to make a 20-minute film, and ridiculously expensive. And all the equipment there's very few of it. They're technicians who jealously guard it. You have to pay them. It's horrible. But now, somebody in East Jamestown, New York, could become the next Spielberg, as against maybe being denied that. So I like the fact that filmmaking is accessible. I like this idea that more people can be creative and create content, which is more about what it's about rather than enclaves and unions and stuff. And I think just as a director and a producer and a creative making a film, the incredible agony of the olden days where the actor does the take of a lifetime, the performance that's incredible and beyond Oscar worthy, fantastic. And it was his last day on set. He gets on the plane and he goes to Timbuktu. The dailies come back and it's out of focus. That kind of horrible nightmare did occur, and it destroys the creative process. Now the director, the producer, the actor, they all know with digital, they've got the take. It's in the can. They've got it, and they can move forward creating and more efficiently making. I find film, it exhausts you. It's like a steam locomotive. Film and steam locomotives are very similar technology, age. Film and steam locomotion came about in the 1820s. And, steam died out in the United States, but it's hung on till the 80s in China and so forth. So you can say that film and steam locomotives had roughly the same kind of lifespan. And with film, you had to do so much work in order to create an image. With a steam locomotive, you have to do so much work just to make the dang thing move, let alone work. Now, you go out to a diesel locomotive, you flip a couple of levers, turn a dial, press a button, boom, you got it's working. And now you want to make a film, and pull out your iPhone, make a film. You expended so much energy in just getting started. I think it's better this way because now it can expend energy on content, on creating, and that's what it's about. It's about creating stuff that reaches out to other people. It's not about building fires. It's not about chemical baths and so forth.
What was that transition to digital like for your own photography, Dennis?
Well, in spite of the fact that, I mean, you did make mention of the fact that I've said, I figure over my career in the movies as a camera assistant, I loaded and downloaded and ran through approximately, just a guess, about 3 million feet of Kodak film. I mean, that's a whole lot of silver bricks, you know. None of it's mine, but I love film. I would just go bananas if somebody said, "Tomorrow, Dennis, we want you to work with a Panaflex for one day." I'd be there in a second. I love the Panavision Panaflex, the finest movie camera of all time. I could thread that thing in my sleep. It's just a wonderful, fabulous thing. And to shoot film and then throw it up on a 100-foot wide screen, it's sensational. It's exciting. It's electric, and so forth. Shooting film still wise. There is this magic of being able to hold in your hand, the slide that you shot, 25 years ago or whatever, or the smell of film in the morning going into your camera, and the whole process of filmmaking. It's a delight. I'm currently scanning all my slides that have been sitting in boxes, and it's been a thrill looking at stuff I haven't seen in years. However, with film, I had my issues. Kodachrome, the vaunted, fabulous stuff, I'm ambivalent about. It's an incredible invention. It was historic. It's iconic. It's one of the finest inventions of image making of all time. However, the thing is, it was really difficult to expose correctly, and I never managed to do it. I'm looking at dozens and dozens of slides where I got the exposure wrong. I finally was able to get a DSLR in 2008, and from then on, things completely changed for me in that, particularly in the realm of exposure, because with digital, you can chimp. Take the picture, look at it. No, that's a little dark. Oh, that's a little too bright. There it is. That's the right exposure. Or you take the shot and you can test it and say, yeah, that works. Again, it comes back to that efficiency thing, whereas before you had to be more conservative. You had to do the wedgie. You had to have the sun over your shoulder. You had to have all of this stuff, because working with film, it's more formulaic. You had to do 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, next picture. 1, 2, 3, 4. Because your brain had to be the computer. The camera, like say those guys who use the speed graphic, you had to pull the slide, you had to set the shutter, you had to set the aperture, you had to do all these processes before you could go click. Then you had to do the whole thing again. Whereas now, you set up your digital camera, you're essentially just pressing the shutter button. It thinks so much stuff for you. Again, it comes to that efficiency, and I find with digital, I use the electric focus. I just use it in a kind of a manual way. I do a back button focus. I press the spot on the railhead where I want it to be in focus for the number boards or what have you. And I wait for the locomotive to get there, and that's when I start clicking. And my eyeballs aren't as good as they used to be, so I know it's going to be in focus. I know the exposure is going to be right. And now, the other half of it all, this digital revolution, like I'm saying, with all these pictures I'm starting to scan, I never had a dark room. The last time I was in a dark room was in 1974. And so much, one of the reasons why the great photographers, like Jim Shaughnessy or Owen Winston Lincoln, so forth, shot in black and white, not really color, was because you could finish the idea that you had in your head in the darkroom. You could do it that, when you click the shutter, it's not done. It's done when you finish processing, when you finish printing it, when you've done that. And the ability, like I said, I got a sophisticated digital software for my computer in 2008. And it was then all of a sudden, that's where I really learned rule of thirds because I was able to crop something for the first time by myself and not having some lab do it poorly. I could experiment. I could try this. I could try that. And then finish what I had started trackside. I could now finish. And I love film. I love steam locomotives. But if I was a railroader, I'd want a diesel locomotive, and I want a digital camera to shoot with.
Age of Steam Roundhouse, a true treasure of railroad preservation, is back for its second public season. This is a brand new roundhouse with nearly 24 steam locomotives on display in Sugar Creek, Ohio. The facility features an 18-stall, accurately reconstructed brick roundhouse surrounding a 115-foot turntable, the largest private collection of steam locomotives in the world, and a fully functioning, working back shop where skilled staff actively restore and repair steam locomotives. The railroad is open for tours this summer and fall and is taking all necessary precautions to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Tours of the roundhouse and shop area will be offered Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays, July through October. Tickets must be purchased in advance on their website at ageofsteamroundhouse.org. If you haven't seen it yet, visit ageofsteamroundhouse.org and follow them on social media. When did you first visit Steamtown National Historic Site?
Well, as Steamtown Historic Site, when was that? That was around 1994. When it became, the official ward of the National Park Service. I, of course, knew about Steamtown back in the 60s with Nelson Blount. And I visited Edaville in the 60s. I visited Steamtown when I was in North Walpole and also at Riverside in Vermont. And I got my first steam locomotive ride, American steam locomotive ride at Steamtown. Golly, I know, fortunately, through people at Steamtown, I've now determined who that man was, and I can see his face. I've just forgotten his name. But anyway, that was like the first time. Now, I'd been, of course, following Steamtown ever since. They were in Vermont, and then they came to Pennsylvania, and I went there on occasion. But in the 80s, I was very much starting my career. I also started a family. I had 2 children. There wasn't that much time or freedom to always go off and do things. So I went to Steamtown not that frequently. Maybe, I don't know, between the time they got to Scranton in 2009, maybe 8 times. Really not that often. But it was January 17th, 2009. I went with my digital camera, and it was a Canon 20D, and it was 10 below, and they were running the ice train with this Canadian National CN 3254 Mikado. And I took pictures that day in this incredible light because it wasn't cloudy, and it was 10 below, and the sun was low, and the snow on the ground, that the locomotives oozing steam from every orifice, and it was just fabulous to look at. But I got to admit, it wasn't until I got home, processed it in my little digital darkroom, and I played around with the sliders and said, what's this going to look like in black and white? And I go to black and white, and boom, that was a seminal moment for me, because for the first time in my life, I'm like 50 something, I finally got control of the camera. Up until that point, I was always kind of searching, wondering, struggling, because I knew what I liked, I knew what I didn't like, but for most of my life, I hadn't a clue of how to get what I liked. And it finally came true for me that particular day. And so anyway, I took some prints, made some prints. I sent them off to Steamtown, to the engineer of the ice train. And I eventually met Aaron Stout, engineer, that way, and this started a relationship. I wound up with a cab ride later that year, which led to a special magazine, an article in a special issue of Trains magazine. And Aaron said, "Well, why don't you become a volunteer?" And I said, "Well, what are you, nuts? That would take away from train photography." Well, I have learned that you should take every opportunity you possibly that you're handed and try to take advantage of them. So I did, and I became a volunteer at Steamtown, and it changed my relationship, obviously, to photography and railroading. Now being able to say that I work with these heavy metal monsters, things that would, if you don't watch out, they'll squash you like a bug, and learning how to actually operate these machines, actually throw those switches, actually follow those rules, know that you're responsible for hundreds of people and their safety. Now, this is important stuff. You don't want to mess around. This is real stuff. You're talking about real people, real lives, real health. So you have to take it seriously. And this kind of point of view makes you appreciate and changes your point of view about things. Now with my camera, I feel confident around the rails. I feel this has allowed me to become more conversant with railroaders. It has opened up tremendous doors where I meet a railroader somewhere, and I say where I am, or it immediately opens doors and an understanding. So I'm able to get pictures that I wasn't able to get before. And I also understand what I'm looking at so much better now. And that, I think, comes through with the pictures.
What led to writing the book?
Well, after I started volunteering there in 2011, I was able to take advantage of being able to, wander around places that were normally off limits. I would be able to get into cabs, get into places that, I wasn't able to before. That was good. But also it was that familiarity. I knew the crew members. They knew me. I could take pictures of them and doing what they're doing. So I started doing stuff, and I'd come home and I'd put up on the computer and, I have to introduce, basically the most important person in my life, and that is my wife, Mel. Mel I have known since I was 20, and since she was 17. We've been married now 41 years. We did, in the earlier years of our marriage, we wound up working together professionally on movie sets, doing commercials and industrials and corporate video and stuff like that. She, in her own right, has been a book editor, a production manager, script supervisor, editor, producer, all that sort of stuff. So she knows what she's talking about. Well, anyway, she started seeing my stuff at Steamtown, and she said, no, this stuff is pretty good. Dennis, you ought to make a book. And myself, with my incredible savoir-faire, I said, again, what are you, nuts? Who the heck would want to see any pictures that I took? And nobody wants to see my stuff. Why would they? And she basically slapped me in the head and the book came about because of her. A lot of ideas in the book, the quotes, the pull quotes and stuff, were her idea. Her emphasis and style and taste about the selection of photos. There's a tremendous amount of her. The book wouldn't exist at all without her, and the book exists as it is a lot because of her. So that was the genesis of that. Of course, it was with Aaron Stout, and we really wanted to try and tell the story of Steamtown, and in a way, this book was my thank you to Aaron and to all the Steamtown folk for all the hard work that they do up there. Steamtown is it is an odd place. It's controversial. It's a federal agency, so some people love to detract it, and believe me, there's a lot you can say. But I think as a whole, the place has been wonderful in telling the story of early 20th century steam railroading. And I think we would have been a lot poorer without it. And I mean, the ability to go up there, you run a Form D on a main line with a freight railroad and steam engines, and wow, it's really cool. It's not a little thing that runs on a mile of track or back and forth. No, this is a real railroad. So the book and all of this stuff, it was really a thank you to everybody who works there. And yeah, I was really glad I was able to do it.
Some questions from you guys. First, Jonah Snyder asks, what is your favorite steam locomotive to photograph?
Gee. Well, in terms of numbers, it's good old 3254. I have more pictures of that. I have thousands of pictures of that. It was like my finger was on motor drive. The 54 is kind of it's not a special locomotive. It's not flashy. It's not fancy. It's pretty straightforward. But I kind of like that because it's like the average Joe steam locomotive. There were thousands of Mikados on this continent, and they tend to get, ignored, as against the flashy 484s, Hudsons, and that kind of stuff. So I really kind of like how she is the average locomotive, and you really can appreciate it. Now, after being in the 54 a lot, working with it a lot, and then in 2015, the nickel plate 765 shows up, and I was able to wrangle a little bit of a cab ride in that thing around the yards at Steamtown. And my gosh, that thing's huge. It's just enormous compared to the 54, which is not really small either. I have a soft spot for the 54 with all her problems and aches and pains, and plainness, because I've had some of my I guess you would have to say some of my greatest successes photographically were with that machine. So I would say it's probably my favorite.
I completely understand. It's that reason that I love 2317, that sense of that in its working life, it wouldn't have been the star at all, but it did its job diligently, and we get to appreciate a solid working machine that didn't have to be flashy to get the job done.
Indeed. And if you ask any of the guys who ran the 17, they absolutely loved it. It was just perfect. You put a little warm water in it, and off you go. You could hook her up, and she'd blast, and she'd just fly out of there. It was a fabulous machine, and did everything you wanted and 10 times more. Hopefully someday she'll be back. I mean, it'll be your basic whole 9 yards rebuilt, but It would be a wonderful thing because it is a very handsome machine. It performs superbly, and it's the right size for Steamtown. It's just perfect. But we are working on the 3713, and that's coming along. Oh boy, it's not. It's going. It's moving into the assembly stage. They get that firebox done. Most of the other parts have been repaired. Apparently, the stoker is in near mint condition, as it is. The wheels are done. They got the firebox done. The tender's cistern is a brand new tank, and it'd be a Pacific. Now, how many Lima Pacifics are there? Well, I can only think of one myself, and this will be really cool to see her working. She's, they're 80-inch drivers. My gosh, what are you going to do with that on a mountain railroad? But it's got a booster as well, and the trains aren't that big at Steamtown, so there's it's going to look terrific, and it'll be an American locomotive that hasn't run in 60 years. And we're all looking very much forward to that.
Al Gallo asks, I'd like to know which locomotives in the collection Dennis would like to see restored, if he has a favorite among them.
My personal favorite for saving, not even restoring to operation so much, is the Canadian Pacific 2929. Rare, streamlined steam, elegant, beautiful machine by, his name's Mr. Bowen. I can't remember his first name. Who designed it for the CPR. I think that is the locomotive that so desperately needs care. I am thrilled at how well the Reading 2124 is right now. Because that was the first steam locomotive I ever saw in my life. And I saw that, was it June 6, 1961? And she blew her Reading 6 chime, and it's been loved ever since. I mean, it's a magnificent machine. Some people don't like the Reading look, but I think on that locomotive, it did come together, and it's an exceedingly handsome, good-looking machine. And it's got roller bearings. It's really powerful. It's got a great whistle. What more could you want? So those I got to admit are two of the ones that if they could be restored, I'd really like that.
Steve Boyko, which railroad was most accommodating / easiest to photograph? It sounds like Steamtown has been that to you throughout the years. So other than Steamtown, what would you rank up there?
Friendly railroad. Gee. I can actually think of the unfriendly railroads, but no, generally, I've not had any particular hassle photographing. There are, of course, some railroads who are welcoming and accommodating to fans, and some that are not. It just is what it is. Things like that come down from the top. You have management who likes fans, so the employees are friendly to the fans, and some are not. I got to admit, also the modus operandi of rail fans have changed so much. When I was younger and all that sort of blah blah blah. Yeah. It was different because liabilities and so forth. Yes, you weren't supposed to trespass. You weren't supposed to do that. It was trespassing and so forth, but nobody cared. And particularly during the bad era of the 60s and 70s, where Northeast railroads were just falling apart. Nobody cared. No employee cared what you were doing on the property. It was junk. It was horrible. Everything's falling apart. Buildings collapsing. Track is bad. Who the heck would want to be there? What are you, crazy? like the Long Island Railroad Yard in Long Island City. When I went there in the 80s, 90s, I walked everywhere. Nobody cared. They just thought I was nuts. Now, you try to step on the property, somebody will come up and, excuse me, you can't be here. So it's rail fanning has changed. I think somewhat to the better, that this consciousness of railroad safety. And one of the things I like about the internet is how everybody's more safety conscious, and how there's so much pressure against people, wedding photographers, event photographers, senior photographers, those crazy people who set up and shoot in the middle of the gauge of shiny rail. I just you're freaking insane. What are you doing? And I think, fortunately, some of that Operation Lifesavers is helping people stay off the tracks. So anyway, I find Steamtown has been my favorite go-to. When I shoot elsewhere, I often strike conversations with people who work at the subway. Oh yeah. There was this nice little story. I went out to, out to Coney Island to shoot. I wanted to get Coney Island, the amusement park, in the background, and I came to this one stop. I think it's 8th Avenue and Aquarium Drive or something, and I'm on the platform one June night, and I'm really at the end. Train comes in. The operator stands up in the car, slams the door down, and he says, "Hi, you taking pictures?" I said, "Yeah, I'm taking stuff of it." "Well, that's great. My name's Harold." And I said, "But okay, great to meet you, Harold. Look, I was wondering, why is Coney Island not lit up?" No, it's not open. You got to come back tomorrow." And I said, "Oh, I see." So, the next night, I dutifully went out there, went to the other platform. It was a better angle. Yes, there's Coney Island. It's all lit up like a Christmas tree. It looks fabulous. Well, on the opposite track at about the same time, in comes a train, stops, window slaps down, and it's, "Hey, Dennis, it's Harold. How you doing?" So you can be friendly with folks in New York City Transit. I've had other people just as friendly as Harold, and so I got to tell you that New York City subway folks, for the most part, are cool about it. They like what they're doing, and they appreciate other people being interested.
Tim Hollingsworth asks, which image are you most proud of?
Oh, that's a toughie. I want to be like Imogen Cunningham, who says, "What's your favorite?" Somebody asked her, "What's your favorite picture?" And she said, "The one I take tomorrow." It's hard. I mean, it's like picking, which one is your favorite child. I have many that I like. I would certainly think probably ranking up there in the top 5 is what I call number 7 City Sunset. It's the number 7 train coming into 40th and Lowry on a September evening, September 13th, or September or something. And there's these striations of cloud and this yellow sky, and the Empire State Building's there, and the Citibank Building's there, and the everything surprisingly black for the most part. But that particular image, I think that in some ways that'll be the one that'll be my iconic or my signature image. If there was one, I'm not sure. It's a funny thing about photographs and artwork in general. And the thing is I was thinking about this just the other day, coming up to getting ready for the podcast, thinking about this. And I'd like to leave it at this. The thing is that creatives, what they're doing at the time they're creating something, an image, a painting, or a photograph, is that they're trying to be sensitive to what elements are swirling around in front of them, and to be able to click the shutter at exactly the right time when all of those elements are coalescing into the best possible image that can be seen in that direction. Now, hopefully they've done that. They've taken it the best moment. Now, that image, I feel the best ones have their own spirit, okay? That now the photographer is not in control of this. The photographer is now just a custodian, is just somebody holding this on. Because once they release this image out to the public, it takes on a life of its own. The public either likes it or doesn't. But the public can like it far greater than the photographer likes it. It goes on to be something very important to other people because that photograph, that image has a spirit, an idea, a soul, a life of its own that makes it captures the imagination of the viewer. And this is exciting stuff because it's lightning in a bottle. You can't control it. You can't create it. This is the fun. This is the amazing thing. You keep going out there looking, trying to capture stuff, and then every once in a while everything all clicks, and it's fantastic. And you've got something, and people like it, and you like it. You've had no control over it, but this is a moment. And these are the moments that you live for, to try and create something that is memorable for the viewer.
A good goal. My last question for you, Dennis, is at the end of the day, when you reflect on all this work you've done, both as part of your career and as your hobby, what gives you the greatest sense of accomplishment?
I would have to say that I've got to say that my rail photography is the capstone in my life. That creatively, from when I was young, when I was trying to copy George Harrison or Jimi Hendrix on the guitar, to when I wanted to try and be like Gordon Willis or Conrad Hall cinematographers, to Winston Lincoln, Steinheimer, Hastings, Plowden, Shaughnessy. I think that what I've been able to do since 2009, 2011, and so forth, when I started having some success with this stuff, I think that being able to get control of the camera, to enjoy the fact that my photographs are accepted by so many people, I'm just floored. It's been so incredibly gratifying. I feel that I've been able to now accomplish a desire that I had to be a creative, to make something that other people enjoyed. And this is, frankly, personally, just about the greatest thing that's happened to me, this photographic success with trains. Oddly enough, I mean, it wasn't meant to be. It was just something, like all of us, we're nutty about trains, and we can't exactly say why. There's always that hobby. There's always that touchstone. Always that thing I could go back to, find comfort in, and to have such success out of this, it's been just a double joy. And I cannot tell you how grateful and thankful I am that people enjoy my work. And thanks.
A lot of people do. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Dennis, and talking about what photography and film mean to you and sharing that. It's clear when looking at your photos, and I'll have some samples of Dennis's work in the show notes so you can check this out, that you put so much thought and effort into it because you you have such a long history with it. You are a part of it now with your volunteering at Steamtown. It's great that you can enjoy it on so many levels, and that enjoyment is infectious.
Indeed. We got to get, infect all the people with as much joy as possible. Nick, I want to tell you that this has been a wonderful honor. I'm thrilled to have been here on the Roundhouse, to be with the luminaries that you've been able to get on your show. I'm just tickled pink, and I thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us.
And now, the question of the day.
Last time on the Roundhouse, we were talking to Joseph DiFrancesco, the curator for the Railroaders Memorial Museum in Altoona, Pennsylvania, which led to the question, what do you love most about the history of railroading in Pennsylvania? A few responses, first from Nathan Aaron. How many tiny, obscure rail lines existed for only a few years before being abandoned or absorbed by a bigger corporation. So many old logging and coal railroads whose only mark of existence are the abandoned right-of-ways left behind. Nothing in books, maybe something on an old map, but barely a company name to be found at the local historical society. Nick Martin writes, I've always loved how much there is. You could explore for hours and not even scratch the surface. Truly fascinating to me. And Matthew Bacon writes, how much of it still exists, is accessible, and is encouraged to access. The fact that I live here and everything is comparatively close helps as well. Your question of the day for this episode is, what inspires your railroad artistry? Let me know on the roundhousepodcast.com, links to social media there. And speaking of social media, if you enjoyed this episode or any of the others you hear, please feel free to share them. That helps to grow the show, and we really appreciate the support. And remember, as always, that the Roundhouse is our house.